That's okay. All right. Hey, welcome to the Calvary Cork bonus sermon midweek podcast. I'm here with my friend and my colleague Nick Cady. Hi, Nick.
Hey Mike, thanks for having me.
So glad to have you. I don't think the regular listeners to this podcast know who you are, so I think it's important that I let them know. Like I said, you're a friend and a colleague. We get to serve on teams together. We've traveled the world together in the past, but the most important thing is that you have visited Cork before.
That's right. I slept in your house, in your bed actually. You weren't
Why don't
there.
you
You
why
were
don't you
in the
just
bed.
hey back up, buddy, and why don't you give some context? Yes, you
Yeah,
slept
so
in my bed.
yeah, I think I had just graduated with my master's and my family, we had gone to England. I studied in England. I got my master's in London. And so afterwards we did a little touring around and then after my graduation ceremony, and then we came to Ireland, and we were really looking forward to hanging out with you. And then you said, "Actually, I'm not going to be there, but you can stay at my house," which was amazing because it saved us money, and we had a great place to stay. So thanks for having us, and someday I hope to return to Cork when you're there.
And I sure would love to be able to show you around because it's a great place. You jogged, right? You jogged by the lock, is that right?
I did, yeah, 2 laps, I think.
Nice. See the swans?
Yep, definitely.
Awesome. All right, opening banter. Check.
Check.
So the second reason why I had you on here is because y you are a pastor of a church in Colorado, Whitefields Community Church, and you are doing a 3 week or you're doing an Advent series looking at like the Old Testament appearances of God like in the flesh in the Old Testament. And when I heard you describe it a couple months ago, I was like, that's it. I'm in. I'm copying you. So we're actually preaching the same sermon series at the same time. And so this week, you and I each, in our own worlds, at our own desks, studied Genesis chapter 32, and then each of us preached about it on the same day, taking two different directions. But I thought you'd be a really good conversation partner to kind of unpack or go a bit deeper into Jacob wrestling with God.
Yeah, and it was really fun this past week because you were studying it and I was studying it. We ended up going different directions. They're very different sermons. I focused actually a lot on a different passage. I
You
focused a
did.
lot on Genesis 28, which is Jacob's vision of the stairway to heaven or the ladder to heaven, whereas you focus mostly on Jacob wrestling with God.
Yes, yes, it's good to say that in case anyone's listening and thinking that I just stole your sermon. No, I stole your sermon idea, but I did not steal like hardly anything of what you said. Each of us, yeah, working on our own, thinking, praying through our contexts, and yeah, we all started at the same point, but two very different sermons. There'll be a link in the comments if people want to hear a different version of looking at how, yeah, Jacob speaks to us about the God who comes down and meets us face to face.
But there is that I love collaboration because
Yeah.
there's things that I don't see or maybe things that you don't see that we can reveal to each other. So, for example, there were a few things that I did get from you that I incorporated in my sermon. They were big hits, I got to tell you, Mike, especially Jake the Snake and Slithering Through Life. Those are my two that I just copied and pasted right out of your
Wow.
brain into my
Did
sermon.
people
And
did they stand up and clap when you said it?
basically, one guy told me I'll never read the Bible again. So
Wow.
you're influencing everybody around the world.
Wait, never read the Bible again or never read the
No,
Bible the
no.
same again?
What did I say? Oh
Never read
no.
the Bible again.
That's not what I meant. He said, I'll never read the Bible the same again.
Yeah.
Because every time he reads it, he's going to see Jake the Snake.
Yeah. Well,
You know what
yeah.
I thought
So
afterwards? I thought I should have said, that's his wrestler name.
yes, 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 yes.
Missed
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for those who don't know, yeah, there was a WWF wrestler by the name of Jake the Snake. And that I was thinking about wrestling, and then that just popped into my head and I remembered that. But yeah, I talked to WWF or WWE only kind of arrived in Ireland somewhat recently after Jake the Snake had come and gone. So
Ah.
yeah.
I was never really into WWF, and then one day I woke up and realized it was now called WWE, and I don't know
Yeah.
when that happened or how it
Yeah.
happened. I
Do
don't
you know
really
why it
want to.
happened? I know why it
No.
happened. Because there's the World Wildlife Fund, which
Mm.
predates WWF, and they own the title WWF, and so they came after the World Wrestling Federation, and said you have to change your name. So they changed it to WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, kind of acknowledging that it's not actually real wrestling. And if you want to know about real wrestling, did you know that I wrestled for like 2.5 months?
I heard that.
Yeah.
What I did on Sunday morning is I went to the gym, and as I was on the elliptical, I listened to your sermon that you preached at your church, and it was great. And I learned that about you. And it was
Yeah.
Giuseppe, I think, who
Guido. It
was
was Guido.
Guido. I knew it was Italian.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, yep, yeah. He smeared my face into the mat.
I had
Um,
a few face smearing events myself. I don't know if you got to hear mine, but
I sure
mine
did.
most of my cousins.
Yeah, yeah. I came from a small family, so I never got hustled around by them very much. So we took wildly divergent ways of approaching the passage, but we all came down to that wrestling match, and you and I both emphasize in our various teachings the fact that like Jacob saw God and wrestled with God, and there's a word for that. It's called a theophany. And I didn't actually spend that much time in my sermon explaining what a theophany was. In fact, I had a slide, but the slide didn't import. So I'm going to have to explain it more further this coming Sunday, as you and I both in our different churches, as we look at the appearance of God again in the book of Joshua. But you did, and maybe you could also help us to understand what is a theophany, what's a Christophany, and what are we supposed to make of these weird events in the Old Testament?
Yeah, a theophany is an appearing of God in a way that is able to be discerned by human beings. And what that means is that sometimes it will be audible, sometimes it'll be physical, other times it'll be visual. And what's unique about a theophany, what differs from a Christophany, is a theophany is some sort of appearing of God in some sort of recognizable way using phenomena that we can perceive as human beings, but it's not necessarily in a human form. And this is interesting because you look throughout the Old Testament and you start to see a lot of these. So sometimes God appears in wind, even like an earthquake,
Mm.
natural phenomena, fire, like a burning bush, or like the fire on top of Mount Sinai when the children of Israel camped at its base. So these are all forms of theophany. Now, sometimes there are theophanies where God appears in a human form, and there's some debate over this, but my thesis is that every theophany in which God appears in human form is actually a Christophany. And I get this from two key verses. There are more, but these are the two that I'm anchoring it in. One is Colossians chapter 1 verse 15, that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And especially if you look at what that word image means, it's used again in Philippians 2, is it verse 5 or verse 6, where he says that though Jesus was the form of
In the
God,
form.
yeah, and it doesn't actually say that he was in the form. It depends on your translation. Some say in, but I believe the original text actually just says that though he was the form of God. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that Jesus is the tangible, visible manifestation of the invisible God. And so if we go over to John 1, verse 18, I guess this is the
Yeah.
third verse. No one's ever seen God. It doesn't even say but, it just says, the one God who is at the Father's side has made him known. And that's speaking about Jesus. So that's my thesis that every time you see God appear in the Old Testament in a physical body, like a human body, that is an appearance of Jesus.
Yeah, and so when let's say God appears as a or in the burning bush, that's not Christ. That is an appearance of the Father, or it's a bit
That's
tricky.
that's a great question, and actually, I again, this is where there is some scholarly debate over it, and here's where I land. I land on that actually being also a form of Christophany. I personally think that any time that God appears in a way that is physical, tangible, perceivable, that those are appearances of the second person of the Trinity.
Hmm. Okay. So then, the reason why we're doing this weird series is we're leading up to the incarnation and the birth of Christ. Um, would you say, and I think the answer is no, but would you say that the incarnation, or what we're celebrating on Christmas, the coming of Jesus, is that a theophany, a Christophany?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's the ultimate theophany. Every other
Okay.
theophany is a preview and a foreshadowing of this theophany, with
Okay.
one
But
exception.
Nick, my Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary that I'm looking at right here says that the phenomena of theophanies were temporary for the occasion that required them, and then they disappeared. On the other hand, in the incarnate Christ, his deity and humanity were joined, not for time alone, but for eternity.
Well, I agree with the second part of that, right? That in the incarnation, Jesus, right, is added humanity to his deity and then never ditched his humanity, right? So
Mhm.
there's a human being reigning and ruling over the cosmos at this moment and for
Yes.
eternity.
Yeah. Amen.
One with a human body, right?
Yeah.
And who is fully human. On the other hand, I do think that theophanies are still something that you see even after. I do think you see them after the incarnation, but I think that they all point to the incarnation. So those which come after the incarnation point back to it, and those which come prior to it point forward to it. And I did say with one exception, I'll give you that exception, is I think that Genesis 3, where we read about God walking in the garden with the man prior
Hmm.
to sin coming into the world, so maybe Genesis 2 as well, that they had this relationship with God. Now, here's a question. I mean, is this just an anthropomorphism, meaning it's just a literary device that's used to describe the relationship they had with God? Maybe. But if it was some kind of experience of God in some kind of tangible way where they heard him or something like that prior to sin coming into the world, I'm not sure, but I think that that might be that those appearances of God to Adam and Eve might actually be more of the ideal, right? They're setting the norm
Hmm.
that we've now diverged from because
Hmm.
of sin, and which we will be reunited to in the restoration.
Okay. And yeah, so there's that, to go back a few minutes, there's the temporary appearances, and that's a contrast with, let's say, the permanent joining of divinity to humanity through Christ. Whereas this mysterious wrestler that shows up in Genesis 32, he didn't we gather he didn't stick around afterwards. He didn't go around wandering looking for the next person to fight, but that he disappeared or slash returned to heaven. What do you think happened to this guy afterwards?
I think that his visible manifestation ceased for that time, right?
Yeah.
Like, but he didn't just like go away to heaven. I mean, he's omnipresent too, right? So
Hmm.
that's the other
Hmm.
part of this
Hmm.
is that, and you know what else is interesting? There are other times where you see manifestations of heavenly beings, and they are temporary, right? Like, so an angel appears to Mary and Joseph in the Christmas story separately, and one in a dream, but the other one not in a dream, right? If I remember correctly. So, I guess my point is that I think it just that the manifestation ceased, but he didn't leave.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, because yeah, your definition of a theophany earlier is that it's a recognizable appearance of God. But I guess in two different senses, like God is with us all the time. Like, in fact, one of the kind of liturgies that I say with my kids, like before bedtime, when I drop them off at school, I always say to them, "The Lord is with you," and they always say back,
Hmm.
"And I am His child." And so the Lord is with my kids. When we're worshiping at Calvary Cork or Whitefields Community Church. At Calvary Cork, we have Thomas O'Mahony and he just shouts out, come move among us, Lord, or those types of things. And it's true. And God is present among us, but that's his omnipresence with my kids. And then also his, even let's say, special presence as he is worshiped and adored is not recognizable in this physical sense that we're seeing here.
Hmm. Yeah, and one other piece of this is that, or maybe something to add to it, is Genesis 28. That's part of the whole story there is that Jacob is in the middle of nowhere, lays his head on a rock, has a dream, wakes up and says, "This place is Bethel, the house of God. And God was here, and I just didn't even realize it."
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Yeah. And he certainly would not say that when he's in a headlock by the river because he'd say God's here and I'm in his grip. I recognize this. This is
Yeah.
not in retrospect he's experiencing the presence of God physically. They're sweating together there in that
Hmm.
wrestling match.
Yeah. Well, Mike, can I ask you a question?
Please.
Because we've both studied this passage, and I think there might be one distinction that I picked up in our different areas of focus. And I just want to ask you this question. All right, here's the question. When Jacob was wrestling with God, or rather when God wrestled Jacob, right? Because Jacob was not the one looking for the wrestling match. But here's my question. Was Jacob's wrestling with God a good thing? Is it something that we should emulate? Or was it a negative thing that we should avoid?
Wow. Wow. Yeah, great, great. Because I mean, in the Bible, there's times, and you've heard this phrase before, but yeah, there's descriptive and prescriptive passages of the Bible. And just for the hearers, like sometimes the Bible just describes what happens and where to learn from it, to believe it, to comprehend it. And then, especially towards the end of the Bible, there's a lot of prescriptive stuff where the Apostle Paul or Peter or Jesus says, "This is how you should live your life." And not every descriptive story actually is a prescription that we should then go and do likewise. However, yeah, that phrase, the idea of wrestling with God, yeah, it has kind of entered into Christian vocabulary. And I mean, yeah, Nick, I was having coffee with somebody 6 hours ago, and he was speaking about a family situation, and he says, I really feel like I'm wrestling with God through this, and I'm really like, and he said, what what was said on Sunday morning really encouraged him to continue and to persist in like prevailing prayer for this challenging ongoing situation. And so yeah, that phrase wrestling with God for some has become a syndicy or a paraphrase of saying like I'm I haven't gotten what I'm asking for from the Lord yet, but I'm not giving up. Like in the way that Jacob kind of gripped hold of him and God's like, "What are you doing? Let go." And he's like, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And so sometimes like we might take the teachings of Jesus that speak about, asking and seeking and knocking, or the parable about the persistent widow who keeps on coming back and keeps on asking and asking and asking. Sometimes we might use this Old Testament language to describe what Jesus teaches us in the New Testament about, praying always and not losing heart. So I think that, yeah, maybe to use it in its modern parlance, it's a good thing to pray and not give up. Um, in the Genesis 32 sense, like, I don't know, like what was he supposed to do? I wonder, like, was he supposed to just kind of like lay down and get pinned early on? I don't know. What do you think? You probably have some thoughts.
I do, yeah. So I do recognize like that it is a little bit of like yes and no, the
Hmm.
answer to this. It was it good or not? Okay, so here's kind of the more of the tack that I took in my sermon. I really focus on the fact that wrestling is always about submission. It's always about subduing an opponent. And with Jacob refusing to give up, on the one hand, it isn't something we should emulate, right? Because it's somebody who's refusing to let God conquer him. And then when he does get conquered, he finally gives up after he receives this blessing. Then God gives him a new name. And actually, that name, there's a lot of the debate over whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, is wrapped up in how we understand the meaning of that name. Because Israel, it comes from two words, right? One is like to rule or you know, subdue, and the other one is God. And here's kind of the question. Does it mean one who wrestles with God and or does it mean one who is ruled by God? And the name can actually mean both things. That's what's it,
Yeah.
and maybe that's actually the brilliance of this whole thing is that both things are true at the same time. That on the one hand, it is true that he's being like I guess commended for wrestling with God and not giving up and desiring to be blessed, which is a meta narrative of his story, right? That is a big part of his story, is that whereas Esau was a cool guy, if you ask me, right? Outdoorsy, liked to hunt. On the other hand, he was not a cool guy because he did not care about the
Yeah.
things of God.
Yeah.
Where Jacob, he was a weaselly guy, but at least he cared. Like in some ways, he wanted the blessing, he wanted the inheritance, and he sought it out. And it wasn't good or perfect, and it wasn't right the way he went about it, but his desire was a big deal. So I guess so. There's that sense, right? The one who wrestles with God, but there's also the sense of the one who is ruled by God. And if you think that name, both those names actually fit with the nation that is being born out of Jacob's family line. On the one hand, they have this ongoing interactive relationship with God in which they're wrestling. On the other hand, they are to be people who are ruled by God. So I guess a little bit of both. You really took the focus of like, look at Jesus wrestling with God in the garden and then ultimately, right, just like Jacob, saying, okay, not my will, but your will be done, being subdued by God or surrendering.
Yeah, I certainly wanted to, yeah, land the plane or end on like a, a hope-filled note of this is Jacob finally coming to an end to himself and being transformed. And then there's a kind of that preaching pastoral emphasis of like God wants to do that with us and in our lives. And that's completely, true and valid. I'm not backing down, Nick. I think I think that yeah. But but here's the thing, if you keep on reading, you see like Jake the Snake like still has some snaky tendencies. And you said that he was given the new name of Israel, and how are we meant to translate it? And it can go either way. Like same thing with him. He could go either way. Like
Mhm.
again, I kind of ended on a high note, and I think the chapter ends on a high note. So but then in chapter 33, he finally meets Esau. It doesn't go nearly as bad as you think it's going to go. It's really great. Wow, they reunite, and then he's like, "All right, hey, you head north, and I'll be there in a few days. I'll catch you later." And then he just goes south, and he just full on lies to this guy. He's just like back to his old snaky ways. And
Yeah.
funny enough, like he has the name, yeah, Jacob or Israel, and throughout the Bible, Genesis, and even throughout later references to him, sometimes he's called Jacob, sometimes he's called Israel. And
Hmm.
so with this guy, we even just do see a little bit of the duality of walking by faith or walking in the flesh, and how even followers of God today can have our good days and our bad days, moments where we're just fleshly, and moments when we're spiritual as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the way I framed it is that Israel reflected who he was becoming, like who God was making him into. But it isn't just like hey, here's your new name, and now all of a sudden you're going to do everything right. And I think that's true of us, right? We receive a
Yep.
new name
Yep.
in Christ, and yet there is a process of sanctification that we go through for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. 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 And I guess talking about, yeah, kind of the personal application and even just kind of the messiness of his life. Um, yeah, also, I listen to you preach a lot, and usually you tell stories from your own life, and um, and this Sunday you didn't.
Hmm.
And usually I don't tell very many stories from my own life. And then this Sunday I did. So we're just swapping places here. So yeah, I kind of told stories about my own, like I literally have like a hip injury as well. It's still to this day, my hip is like swollen. From like a trachonteric bursitis from like an injury that I got like 8 years ago, and my hip still is pretty swollen. So I think about this story a lot and think about like what it means to kind of live with a limp, and kind of walk with a spiritual limp, leaning upon the Lord. And I noticed that you didn't have any stories about your limp. Is it okay if I ask you about like how you found like living in dependence on the Lord and even post injury?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to talk about it. I had talked about it the week prior to that. And so I decided, or 2 weeks prior, I guess. I decided, I don't need to keep telling people about my injury. They can all watch me walk up on stage, gingerly or whatever I do. Yeah. So for those who might not know, I had a snowboarding accident 2.5 years ago in April of 2023. And yeah, I fell really far, shattered both my ankles. One of them healed well. The other one did not. It's structural damage and held together by pins and plates and stuff. And yeah, I live with pain every day. I can't really walk well. I can walk okay, but sometimes I use crutches. I around the church, you can't see it in frame right now, but I have a knee scooter, so I put my knee on a scooter and zip around the church building. So yeah, I mean, I would say that it is a constant reminder of the fact that I am not invincible, and I think that that's good. I don't mind it, to be honest. It doesn't. I've never felt since this injury happened any sense of like, God, why did you let this happen to me? I feel like it was the consequence of my own action. I took a risk and I came up short, and that's just what happens if you snowboard. But on the other hand, it has taught me a lot about dependence on God. And one of my favorite quotes that I've learned through this time, I learned a lot just reading some stuff from Joni Eareckson Tada or Johnny
Mm.
Eareckson Tada. Man, she has so many good things to say. Like for one time, she was asked if you could go back in time and not, have jumped in that lake that you jumped into when you got injured with a spinal injury, would you do it? And she says, I wouldn't do it. In other words, I wouldn't go back and undo what I did, because she said that my injury has been the greatest thing that God has used in my life for his glory and for my good. And she said that when she gets to heaven, she hopes that uh, the Lord will let her bring her wheelchair, even though she won't need it, just so that she'll remember what he used in her life. And I can relate to those things a lot. And my favorite quote from her, though, she said, maybe the truly handicapped people in this world are the ones who don't realize how much they need God. Because God is greater to those who recognize how much they need Him, and weakness causes you to need God more. And I absolutely relate to that. And I think that that's right. I think it's part of this story as well that we see about Jacob having a limp for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing us into that story and that ongoing story. It's not a tidy one. It's not like, oh, these are lessons I learned 8 years ago or 15 years ago, but are still there. Yeah, we don't want to say like, oh yeah, all injury is good. Yeah, it's not good, but
No.
they're lessons learned. And I've read Johnny Erickson Tada as well. Probably the same, everyone hands you a Johnny Erickson Tada book once you get injured. Really, if you get injured bad enough, then you get handed one of those
Yeah.
books. But yeah, I remember reading that exact same thing of her talking about bringing the wheelchair with her into heaven. And yeah, I think she says like, not because I loved it, but because I hated that stupid thing. But she wants to be able to thank the Lord for the lessons that he taught her when she was in that wheelchair. So again,
Hmm.
not that it's bad, not that injury is good. Sorry, not that, yeah, but not that injury is good, but yeah, the Lord can use that. And I quoted Spurgeon in my sermon, and somebody came up to me afterwards and says that line of his has been so valuable. to him over the years, and it says, "I have learned to kiss the wave that smashes me upon the rock of ages."
Hmm.
And yeah, may the Lord work in the midst of our trials, our losses, our crosses, the things that have made life difficult, but that show the sweetness and the goodness of God.
Yeah, and just for your own church members, I've told you this, Mike, but I think it'd be good for people at Calvary Cork to know this, that you're out there just doing good and helping people all over the place. When I got injured, you said something to me that stuck with me and really, really just helped me get through it, which it was that you said that you learned this from your own injury, that you said, a lot of people are going to come up to you and they're going to ask you, like, okay, what's God doing? God must be teaching you so many things through this. And you said, listen, you one day will look back and realize all the things that God taught you through it. But right now, this is just a bad situation that you have to go through. So don't put pressure on yourself. You will know those things in time, but don't put pressure on yourself to try and like figure it out. And that was such a I don't know, life-giving and encouraging thing for me. And I have put that into practice. So
Wow. Sound like I'm a pretty smart guy. So, no, sounds like I just got a head start on this whole suffering thing
mm,
ahead of you. And then now here, 2.5 years later, I'm putting you on the spot and saying like, oh, what's the Lord teaching you? But hopefully
yeah,
some time has elapsed and you can process and give some thoughts.
for sure.
Well, anything else you want to talk about in Genesis 32?
I think there's a lot more to think about, and I realize that we don't have time to delve into every aspect of it. But some other questions that came to mind was like, how do we know that this is actually God that he's wrestling with? Because this story is mentioned in Hosea 12, and it says that Jacob wrestled with an angel. Now, preview for everybody who's going to tune in to
Yeah,
the next
yeah,
sermon
yeah.
is that we're going to meet the angel of the Lord and we're going to actually answer that question. So I guess this is more of a teaser than it is a answering the question session.
Yes, I'm looking forward to next Sunday in at both of our churches because I found it to be quite challenging to teach this passage because it's right in the middle of the story. There's so much context. You have to know the life, and so I felt like there was so much to cover before I could kind of get to the main point. Whereas this coming Sunday, it's just like three verses from Joshua chapter 5. In fact, Jacqueline, who she is a kind of service coordinator, she texted me to be like, "Are you sure it's like the reader is only going to read three verses?" So it's
Yeah.
like it's notably shorter, which I want to take the opportunity to kind of speak a bit more about, yeah, the theology behind Christophany, also to get into some of the nuts and bolts and the weeds of who the angel of the Lord is, and maybe unpack some of the more theology behind this. So
Yeah,
thanks for
absolutely.
preparing that and putting that out there on the table.
Cool.
Okay, so if people want to listen to your take, again, like I said, there'll be a link in the description of this to the Whitefields Church sermon feed from this past week. And then also, if people like listening to Nick Cady talk about theological issues, he hosts a great podcast called Theology for the People, which is kind of like this, but longer and going deeper into theology, I think in a really commendable like ground level approach. I think anyone can put their thinking caps on and then follow along as you kind of talk us through theology or interview theologians and authors. I think you've got the head to grasp the big stuff, but you're also like rooted enough to help it make sense for ordinary people like us. So link for that as well. I think that's it, Nick.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Mike. And hey, good people of Calvary Cork, someday I hope to meet you all in person.
That's right. And you have Irish heritage, right?
Yeah, somewhat, but I've learned that I'm more of an Irish American than I am so
We'll yeah. All right. Well, on that lackluster downer note, all right. Thanks for your time, Nick.
all right, thank you.